Hey, let's talk about Mr. Miracle. New trade paperback by the writer Tom King, artist Mitch Gerards. Came out from DC Comics just a week or so ago. It's $24.99, and it collects the 12-issue miniseries of the same name. It was a Eisner Award winner, best writer, best artist. So this may be the one of the most highly anticipated trade paperback collections of the year, certainly from DC Comics. I liked it. I thought it was interesting. I thought it tells a story that hasn't been told before, and it tells it in a way that it's never been told before as well. It's pretty experimental stuff. If you're coming into this hoping for a lot of like slugfest standard kind of superhero hijinks, you're gonna be surprised pretty early on, especially when our main character attempts suicide by slitting his wrists in the first issue, right? So that right there tells you something's a little bit different. Tom King really likes exploring sort of the inner turmoil of these characters. In this one, Mr. Miracle gets a full going over. So who's Mr. Miracle, right? So if you know anything about DC in the 70s, when Jack Kirby made the move from Marvel to DC, he created a bunch of new characters called the Fourth World Saga, which included the planets of New Genesis and Apocalypse and Darkseid and Mr. Miracle and Orion and Light Ray and this huge cast of really fantastical characters that never really spoke to me a lot. You know, I'm not a huge fan. I mean, I am a huge fan of Jack Kirby, but that stuff didn't like push my buttons the way, say, his work at Marvel did, like his stuff on Avengers and Captain America and what have you. But it's still interesting stuff. So the main sort of like setup, it's almost Shakespearean, is Mr. Miracle is the son of the High Father, the ruler of New Genesis, and Orion is the son of Darkseid. And sort of after they were born, a truce was made, and Orion was sent, Darkseid's son was sent to New Genesis to be raised, and the High Father's son was sent to Apocalypse to be raised. And if you're raised on Apocalypse, it's kind of a shitty upbringing, right? So he was raised by Granny Goodness, the head of the Female Furies, basically a sadist who raised him kind of in a constant state of torture, like constantly like torturing him and setting him up in kind of like death traps of which he would escape. And eventually he escaped Apocalypse. He came to Earth. He met an escape artist on Earth by the name of Mr. Miracle. He took that identity, hooked up with Oberon, the sort of little person sidekick guy. And, you know, in the 80s and 90s, we saw him back in sort of, he used to be in the Justice League, and sort of a comical era for the Justice League, and he fit in really well to that. And, you know, he's married to Big Barda of the Female Furies. And this book is really about them. This book is about Scott Free. Oh, that's the nickname that Granny Goodness gave him. That kind of stuck with him through his life, is Scott Free. And then he became Mr. Miracle and got this one of the goofier costumes of anyone. But fun and interesting and like sort of fits the persona of the escape artist persona. Does he have any superpowers? I don't know or think so. He's got a couple of discs that he kind of stands on and can fly around on, but he's never really been seen like... I've never seen him do anything more than like punch a guy or escape from a crazy trap, right? So kind of a interesting hero. And the conceit of this book is sort of like he wants to see if he can escape death, but does he want to escape life? He's in turmoil. He tries to commit suicide. he has a baby with Big Barda, and it is drafted back into the Apocalypse New Genesis War by Orion, his sort of step half brother, actually Darkseid's son, who is now the High Father on New Genesis and is pretty much an asshole. And one of the really coolest things about this book is the art. Mitch Gerards does some really experimental, crazy looking stuff. But the one thing we got to see that I've never seen before is Mr. Miracle in a battle looking like a badass. And basically he's got his flying discs and he's got a giant sword, and there's a lot of really, really violent battles going on in this book. And Mr. is almost Game of Thrones-ish in scope in this giant battle, and Scott is like a general. Mr. Miracle is a general in the army, and he's sort of like the most respected general because he doesn't just throw his troops into harm's way the way his brother Orion seems to be doing. And anyway, it's set up as sort of obviously a power struggle, and a war story, and Scott is sent to sort of assassinate Granny Goodness, who raised him but is leading the army from Apocalypse, and but that unlocks memories of him. Maybe Granny actually kind of cared for him sometimes and loved him, and turns out Granny seems to have like a secret agenda that Scott, Mr. Miracle, is gonna be the one to kill Darkseid and sort of take over Apocalypse and New Genesis, and it's sort of like the almost like a prophecy. And I don't want to spoil this by saying what happens, but even if you read it, you might not understand what happens because it's a little bit confusing. The ending is open to interpretation. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on. Is he alive? Is he dead at the end? Well, there's also a lot of stuff like this. So like the anti-life equation is almost used as a metaphor in this book, and it's really about Scott exploring his potential heaven and potential hell, his family life on Earth, where he still lives in Los Angeles with Big Barda and his new baby, but he commutes via boom tube to the wars, and where he's like, a general and obviously involved in the horrors of war. So it's fun. It's fun. It has funny parts. There's sort of like some absurdity when they're discussing remodeling their condo in LA while they're in the midst of crazy sci-fi battles on Apocalypse. It's an interesting contrast. It's kind of funny. But ultimately, I wanted to read it. Right? It's hard to compel you to read sometimes something that's not really pulling at you. And 12 issues. I wanted to read it. I enjoyed it. I don't think it's for everyone. I don't think Tom King's writing is for everyone, or for every book, for that matter. Where I did like this, and I like some of the stuff he's been doing on Batman. Heroes in Crisis is sort of leaving me scratching my head a little bit and a little bit baffled by what's going on there. But that being said, I think Mr. Miracle is worth your time. It's worth a read. It's like nothing else out there. It's like no other take on the character. The artwork is, quite frankly, fantastic. It's quirky, but it is beautiful and interesting and fun to look at. And you're going to see things in this book that you've never seen before. The question is whether you wanted to see them or whether you enjoy seeing them. That's for you to decide. But if you like superhero comics, and you also like experimental kind of artier comics, then this might be the perfect, worlds collide, collision moment book that could be for you. If you're looking for a fun popcorn follow-up to the Justice League movie or something like that, that's not what this book is. This is the opposite of that. And that's a good thing. We need all kinds of different comics. We need quiet, introspective ones. We need loud and brash, in-your-face ones. And we need everything in between. And we need comics that are about external struggles and war and fighting and punching. and ones that are about internal struggles and emotion. And if you can bring those two together, I think that's a tricky feat to pull off. And I think Tom King and Mitch Gerards pulled it off with Mr. Miracle. So go to your local comic book store. Please find a copy and read it. Please comment below in the comment section. And like and subscribe. I've never reminded anybody to do that. But if you made it this far in the video, chances are you might like some of my other videos. And I'm going to try and put them out on a more regular basis. So come on and check them out. And check out Mr. Miracle.